Welcome everybody to Cross Pollinations, the Canadian Association for Health Humanities Virtual Rounds series. This is a series that we've had going for several months now, and we've had so many really incredible discussions. I am Nick Brewer from the League of Canadian Poets, and I'm very excited to be introducing this week's presentation to you. First up, I do have a couple of housekeeping details to share. One is that we have no financial disclosures or conflict of interest to disclose. And I'm also going to read the League of Canadian Poets Land Acknowledgement. We would like to acknowledge that this organization is situated upon the traditional territories of the Wendat, Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nations, and the Métis Nation. The treaty that was assigned for this particular set of lands is collectively referred to as the Toronto Purchase and applies to the lands east of Brown's Line to Woodbine Avenue and north towards Newmarket. The League of Canadian Poets recognizes the enduring presence of Indigenous people on this land, and we recognize that art, poetry, and poetic practice related to the work of our organization takes place in traditional territories of many nations. I do encourage each of you to share your land acknowledgement in the chat, although I also like to say that as we have become more accustomed to land acknowledgements, I think that's wonderful. I think it's amazing that we all have this new little bit of knowledge in our heads about the lands that we live and work from. But in an effort to continue to actively engage with this, I also encourage you to share a resource that you have found valuable, either in educating yourself or that you really enjoy recommending to other people, either to educate yourself and others on the ongoing genocide against Indigenous peoples in Canada, something very topical, or something historical. I personally found incredible value in Tanya Talaga's book, Seven Fallen Feathers. And that is, I think, probably my favorite resource to recommend as a starting point to really understand the impact, the ongoing impact of what feels like it might be history. So if you have a resource that you'd like to share, please feel free to share that in the chat. I'm just going to go ahead and read this slide, Mitigating Potential Bias. Each presenter has been given instructions about the conflict of interest form prior to their proposed session date. Included in this package are instructions on how to mitigate bias in their presentations. For instance, if there is any reference to specific medications in their presentations, to use generic names. Through this process, we endeavor to prevent any perceived or real conflicts of interest. However, if any conflicts of interest become apparent during the session, please alert myself via the chat and I will intervene. And then finally, I'm going to give you just a very brief introduction to our presentation, where we are joined by Dr. Mary Pat Sullivan and poet Martha Gould. And oh my gosh, I'm the worst and I have forgotten Jen's last name. Jen Gordon, I'm sorry, Jen. Jen Gordon, who reached out to the League of Canadian Poets about this, will be moderating the discussion. The Rare Dementia Support Impact Study is a 5-year research study funded by the Economic and Social Research Council and National Institute for Health Research in the UK. This work is a collaboration between Nipissing University in North Bay, University College London in England, and Bangor University in Wales, and led by Professor Sebastian Crutch at the Dementia Research Centre, UCL. It is the first major study of its kind to learn more about the support needs and care preferences of people affected by a rare or young onset dementia. This research includes the exploration of the use of poetry as a methodological tool to, 1, empirically and theoretically understand the experiences of people affected by rare or young dementia across different stages of dementia, and 2, assess the potential of poetry to engage the public and raise awareness about different forms of dementia other than Alzheimer's disease that are more likely to be diagnosed in younger people. Thank you for listening to all that. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen now and spotlight our 3 wonderful speakers for you. and then we will get going. Welcome to Martha Gould, Dr. Mary Pat Sullivan, and Jen Gordon.
Thank you so much, Nick, for that introduction, and to everyone for attending tonight. I wanted to start on behalf of Mary Pat and Martha and I to start with an acknowledgement of the land on which we sit. And I want to acknowledge that we'll be sharing and listening and reflecting on the traditional territory of the Nipissing Nishnawbek, the lands presently stewarded by Nipissing First Nation and Okies First Nation and protected by the Robinson-Huron Treaty of 1850. For myself personally and professionally as a social worker in Northern Ontario, living, working, and participating in community, I believe this acknowledgement is so important to our collective ongoing learning and unlearning. The research poetry that we're going to talk about tonight includes participants from across the globe, including Canada, Great Britain, Singapore, and Switzerland. This research has connected people who we know have previously felt isolated in the rare nature of their experiences, enlarging communities and joining people together. Before we launch into the reading of the poetry this evening, I'd like to turn to Dr. Mary Pat Sullivan and ask her to share where we started with this study. So Mary Pat, can you tell us a little bit about rare and young onset dementia and the importance of this research study?
Thanks, Jen. Nick shared some of that in our introduction, but I just wanted to let everyone know that we're 3.5 years in to a 5-year study that is exploring the nature of support that might be offered to people who are diagnosed with a dementia that is not necessarily Alzheimer's disease. So everybody's familiar with Alzheimer's disease because it's the most common form of dementia. However, at least somewhere between 5 to 15% of people living with dementia have a disease or a condition that isn't Alzheimer's disease. And I'm talking here about conditions such as frontotemporal dementia, Lewy body dementia, progressive primary aphasia, posterior cortical atrophy, or indeed young onset Alzheimer's disease. And what is interesting is that these rarer forms of dementia are most often diagnosed in people under the age of 65. So it's in what we often call an off-time diagnosis. It's dementia not in the later years of life, but mid-adulthood. And there's a recent study that was published very recently that suggests that around the globe, we're probably looking about 4 million people with a diagnosis of dementia between the ages of 30 to 64. So it's a smaller population with these forms of dementia, but one that has normally been overlooked, particularly in dementia research, but as well in services for people living with dementia. And what is also interesting is with these dementias, the symptoms are often different than the loss of memory. Often we're seeing symptoms that are affecting people's vision, people's language, people's personality, or even movement. And because the symptoms are different, and because the person is at a younger age, people are often misdiagnosed or struggle for a long time to get a diagnosis. And then a transition for support doesn't happen because supports are often not available or patchy at best. And so that's why the study is important, to learn how we can learn more about the experience of people living with these types of dementia, and then how best to support them. And another interesting point with this study is, as we've been coming forward with our findings, these are being fed into a current support service that is delivered by colleagues in London. And we're learning more about what works for whom and when it works as the findings emerge.
Thanks, Mary Pat. I think that we'll head over to Martha and start with a reading of two of the poems from the recently published volume, There Is So Much I Could Say.
Am I on now? I can't tell if okay.
Yeah.
Can I just say briefly then that my job here was to take the words of the participants and form them into a poem, which is what I did. So the words are not mine. The structure and shape of the poem is what I have contributed. Where to begin? Where to begin? Brain blindness. Vision is darker. That's not a rubber mat. I can see it, but at the same time, I can't see it. Confusing, disorientating, good days and foggy days, frightening. Where to begin? Which way round does this go? Things aren't where they appear to be. I wish you could see through my eyes. Invisible dementia, misdiagnosed and misunderstood, getting confused more often. How to describe something, no more words. Which way round does this go? Why can't I find things? I wish you could see what I see. It's a black hole. I can't do anything I used to be able to do. Eyes are okay in themselves. No more driving, staying positive as possible. How to begin? Why can't I find things? Where is the top or the bottom? When I struggle to understand, word searching, things aren't where they appear to be. The brain affects the eyes. Embuggerance. No more words. Misunderstood. Where is the top or the bottom? Where is the top or the bottom? Why can't I find things? Which way round does this go? Where to begin? The second poem is No One Would Believe Me. Do you have anxiety? People are so rude. No one would believe me. Heartbreaking, cruel disease, disaster, increasing difficulty. My most frustrating memory gap is not being able to recall. I am so depressed. There is no treatment to stop or slow up. Mad, furious, sad, lonely. I cannot find my wife. She doesn't know she's lost. Why is Mom having trouble walking? Mom could hurt herself. I will not live to be an old lady. I'm not following the other lovely women in my family. They say it's good to learn new things. Anosognosia is not one of them. The names of my former students and teacher colleagues, my most frustrating memory gap. Do you have anxiety? Tiring. Learn to forgive yourself when you become exasperated. Mom was right. What do we do? Learn to forgive yourself when you become exasperated. We walk holding hands again, like when I was little. Sorry, my assistant has just come. How long will this last? I still see her. Eyes closed now, her laugh is still hers. We're all okay. Learn to forgive yourself. Her laugh is still hers. I apologize for my assistant coming when he did.
Thank you so much, Martha. Yeah, we know we see these themes of pets playing a big role in this work.
Cats in some of them, yes.
Yes. I had mentioned earlier the title of the volume, the poetry volume that has just recently, very recently been published and will soon be available online, entitled There's So Much I Can Say. There's so much I could say. In the volume, there is a foreword written by Harry McQueen, and I wanted to share a few of the words. I find the foreword very powerful. When dementia comes into our lives, we are forced to reconsider how we live, love, and function in the world. This is always challenging, but it can be life-affirming too. It can bring us together in ways that we never thought possible. These sentences, when I read the foreword, stand out to me so clearly as a reflection of the complexities of the diagnosis of dementia, in particular rare and young onset dementia. I'm going to pass this next question over to Mary Pat. Mary Pat, you personally have been affected by young onset dementia. Can you tell us a little bit about your own experience and perhaps how this connects to the work that you do now?
Thanks, Jen. My mother was working as a nurse, and at 51 years old was diagnosed at the time as having young onset Alzheimer's disease. Knowing what I know now about dementia, I expect that it was another rare condition rather than Alzheimer's disease. But needless to say, the early onset was a blow to our entire family. I was in my early 20s, living at home and at university at the time, and my younger sister living at home with my father. I still find it really odd to be speaking about my mother, given it wasn't something I talked about during those years. No one asked us anything. No one understood anything at the time, and the stigma was so powerful that our voices were silenced in all circles, even within the family. We cared for my mother for almost 18 years until she passed away. And what is striking to me now as I think about it was my father felt it really necessary that he go to her parents and tell them that he would continue to look after their child. And promise he did, and he continued to do that with the help of my siblings and myself. And my grandfather, my mother's father, eventually moved in with us, and 90 years old at the time, I can still recollect images of him sitting at the table feeding my mother, like he might have done when she was a child. The experience was a huge sense of loss for everyone in the family, and watching parents experience periods of deep pain was really difficult. And the 21-year-old me didn't understand that pain and didn't know how to ease that pain. And I think for me, my life became less spontaneous. Every day and everything was planned to accommodate my mother's needs. So I made education decisions, career decisions, and other personal decisions so I could be there to help. When my mother passed away after 18 years, I recall people commenting to me what a relief it must have been, given the suffering our family had endured for so long. And those comments were really hurtful to me at the time, but it took some time for me to even process why they were so hurtful. But I came to understand that people had focused on the painful times and had forgotten that despite the dementia, there was lots and lots of joy and happiness in our lives as well. And I came to also think that by those comments, they, negated 18 years of my life. Those weren't wasted years. Those were years that were led with both purpose and meaning for me. They weren't at all wasted. My parents taught me the meaning of love during that time. And my mother, without ever knowing it, continued to be an instructor for me on how to live through life's ups and downs. And those are lessons I'll never regret receiving at that time in life. So albeit late, I'm pleased to be sharing my voice of the experience, as well as sharing the voices of so many other people I'm continuing to work with now.
Mary Pat, I think one of the things that I am always so enthused about in working with this research is the voices of lived experience. You know, as a social worker and coming from that social work perspective, this is something I think that we and also many allied healthcare professionals can really value and learn from, those voices of lived experience. And I think it's such an interesting way to express these lived experiences through poetry. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to ask you if you can tell us a little bit about poetry as it has been chosen as a research method in the impact study.
Yeah, well, why poetry is a great question. And so from a very practical perspective, the funders of our study, which is the Economic and Social Research Council and the National Institute for Health Research in the UK, one of their requirements when they fund studies is that you're also innovating methods. And the innovation of methods, particularly as we develop understandings of supporting people living with dementia, was felt really important by them. So, but more importantly, we were considering that growing body of literature that is emphasizing that the engagement in participatory arts for any of us impacts positively on our well-being. So we have evidence around, you know, improving moods, improving relationships with people, decreasing social isolation, a positive way to engage people in sensory stimulation. And so more and more we see this in healthcare and even in dementia care, where people are using the arts to engage individuals. But poetry as a research method is rather rare. And so many researchers will argue that you can bring together or integrate the process and the product of art alongside or with lived experience. And that's what excited us. So thinking about trying to get people to share their experiences of living with dementia with us in a way that's accessible. So somebody who might have language problems, for example, how can they answer questions with fewer words? And this was one way that we could do that. We could ask a prompting question and have people answer it in words or short phrases rather than the typical interview. And it was also felt that that single voice could be brought together into a collective voice, and perhaps the collective voice be more meaningful than the voice on its own. The other consideration for us was this also an accessible way to engage in conversations about living with dementia with the general public or professionals working with people with dementia. No one reads my academic papers other than other academics, but other people might read poetry.
Thank you. I'm going to shift things back to Martha Gould and ask Martha to read the next two poems that are up. There's so much I can say, and Unwavering Braveness.
No more from you. Stop it. There is so much I could say. FTD is a journey, a terminal degenerative brain condition, a slow and painful death I encounter each day, a condition which steals an individual's personality. Sorry. There is so much I could say. Frustrating when you can't remember words or things her friends no longer call as before. There is so much I could say. Common household tasks are difficult. Worried if husband not available to take care of business, taxes, driving car, housework. There is so much I could say. PPA has changed our retirement plans. Worried about being a bother or a problem at times or in the future. The chapters of our retirement will be different than the plans we had made. There is so much I could say. It demands continuous learning. It requires extra sprinkles of patience for your loved one who has limitations with communication and planning. My husband is my best friend and soulmate. I am a lucky woman to have him in my life. He treated me like a queen for over 30 years, and he is still my knight in shining armor. There is so much I could say. Live each day as that is the only guarantee you have. That is how I live life now. There is so much I could say. Unwavering braveness. Brain blindness, extreme turmoil, an excruciatingly slow drip of profound loss. Unwavering braveness. A time when old memories get lost but can be found. You easily see that she is not the same person you remember, but she believes that she has not changed, that she is still the same person she has always been. She may not understand the nuance of the situation and say or do something out of place. When you speak to her, she may not know a word you use. She will ask you the meaning of that word. You often have to repeat a question, and her answers will likely be slower than before. PPA can progress slowly. As it is progressing with me, I am finding I have to think more about how to pronounce words correctly, to spell correctly, to remember the definition of a word. My short-term memory is not as good either, so I record a lot of things to make sure I remember. For example, what to do, what has happened. I can get very sad some days about the progress, but then I try to remember how blessed my life has been. I know I will not be living as long as many of my relatives' parents, but try to focus on how wonderful many parts of my life have been. PPA is very depressing to know that at this point, there is no cure treatment for it. I am most interested to be involved in research, if I can, to help anyone who gets PPA.
Thank you, Martha. There's a comment in the chat, a comment or question that I just wanted to take a moment to clarify. Rose has talked about referring to lived experience and wondering if we're addressing people who live with someone with dementia as those living with experience. And just to clarify that when we talk about that tonight and within the study, we include both people who are living with people with dementia as having lived experience, and also those living with dementia. So the participants in our study, they include folks living with dementia and also families. Sometimes people will refer to as caregivers or care providers, carers. We include those systems of support as well as the people living with dementia. Thanks, Rose, for that comment and clarification. I wanted to take a minute Martha, you had mentioned earlier that your role was as poet facilitator and that these were not your words, but you were the orchestrator. I think you might have used the term orchestrator of the words. And I wondered if you could just tell us a little bit more about how you came to be involved in the impact study in this project.
I would say, sorry, my disruption is leaving. Slightly by accident, because we're all in the same community here, and Mary Pat mentioned this. I'm interested, of course, in how poetry can be used as a communication device. And in this project, the respondents give answers to questions, and those answers are passed on to me. So I have a collection of statements from people I don't know at all, have not seen and know nothing about. And I start assembling those into a poem. So I've used a quilt making metaphor for myself, because I feel like people give me important pieces of material, family material, Uncle Will's tie and Aunt Mildred's old apron and things like that. They give me something that means something to them. And then I put the pieces together into a pattern and I sew them up and present them. And the final product, I hope, is both beautiful and warming. What I find particularly interesting is, in my position in the middle, I'm trying to be respectful both of the respondents, who I do not know, respectful of what I infer their meaning is from the words that I have, and also make something that will go forward and reach other people on the other side. So it's a very interesting position to be in. It's not a normal one for me as a poet, where I'm using my own words and my own ideas, but I have found it very interesting. I would like to say that when we started talking about this, my mother was still alive and she was having late onset dementia. And so some of the things mentioned here, I had been experiencing through her, and it's all the more meaningful to me because I know something about how this goes for people. So that's how I became involved. It's been very interesting.
Thank you. Mary Pat, I'll turn back to you and ask you if you can describe some of the outcomes that have come out of this research.
Well, we're still working on this, but there's a number of things that have struck me in relation to the use of poetry. And I think one of the most striking things is when you're asking people questions that are particularly intimate and are responding to something that you can't always find the right words for. The ability for someone to share fewer words or phrases and build a collection has indeed been most powerful. And so the collective voice shares an awful lot, where we sometimes find it very difficult to describe something we're experiencing in a lot of detail. But in terms of people engaging with people, most people were very receptive to the idea of contributing words. It was easy, it was accessible, it didn't take a lot of time. And people told us they appreciated the time to sit and reflect before responding with some words or phrases. Despite that the reflection was sometimes painful, but it was also a time for them to look for meaning in terms of what they were experiencing. Now, some people told us, no, no thanks, I'm not into poetry, right? Which wasn't totally surprising, and they rather do something else to support this work, not poetry. But that's okay. So we had that as well. But what was also very striking is that after Martha would prepare the poem is sent back to participants. So each participant responded to 4 prompts. And Martha completed a poem for each of those prompts. And when completed, it was sent back. And then we would ask people about the process or how they received the poem. And that's where we had some really interesting feedback. And one that was particularly important when I think about the geography of Canada, and our participants are located across the country, and participants telling us how they felt connected to one another. They have never met, they never will meet. They don't know who one another who one another is, but they felt a connection to the group that shared words for a particular poem. Other people told us the importance that they could take the poem, and some brought it to their support groups. They are attending some support groups, and they would share the poems with other people in the group. Other people told us that the poem was really important because they could share it with family or friends in hopes that the family and friends might understand a little bit more about what they're going through. And other people also told us that the poems permitted them to leave something behind for future generations. And that was really important for them, so that future generations would understand this moment in time once they're long gone. So that was all very, very interesting for us. The poetry book was unexpected, but because we had so much feedback on people wanting to share their voices and to build awareness around rare or young onset dementia, we were encouraged to pursue publication. So taking all of the poems, which I think there's 34, and put them into a collection and share that voice far, far and wide.
Thank you. There's the metaphor of the quilt and the idea of these people over a wide geography having these experiences that are quite intimate in the sharing of the words and creating these quilts with words. From the work that I do with people as a social worker, thinking of any time in our experience we can feel that we are similar to others or have a shared connection with others, it can be so powerful. Martha, I'm really interested from your perspective as the poet facilitator, what were some of the outcomes that you perceived either as a poet or that came from the participants?
It certainly put my attention on words in a different way, on these words. Some of the words repeat in the respondents' answers, and to re-emphasize them or try to make them come forward in a different way. That was very interesting, to try to make a shape out of what they had. I can see very clearly, I think, that the poem becomes a source of energy, and poems are trying to find an audience. So since this is all along a question of communication, both for the person who is experiencing some weird symptoms trying to communicate with themselves, with their physical body and with their mind, then with their family and friends, then with caregivers, trying to get a diagnosis, that kind of thing. This is another way to try to communicate all of that forward to see how far it could go. And so I found that very interesting. It's quite different from writing your own poems about your own life, which is what I would generally do. This is a community effort. And I've enjoyed being the facilitator of it.
Thanks, Martha. I think that we have 2 more poems to read next.
If I can do that, right. Why I repeat the same question at random.
Mm-hmm.
You've been told there's something out of tune in my muddled brain, slow brain death with physical appearance often not changing, a roller coaster ride, confusion that overwhelms, insidious, heartbreaking to see a vivacious, intelligent person decline in this way. Why I repeat the same question at random. How can one word, dementia, erase random notes on a page of a life lived in harmony together? Why does one simple word change the dynamics of a life lived? Why I repeat the same question at random. Dementia is a disease that tears at your heart. To watch someone you love beyond words become someone you don't know is terrifying, sad, and maddening. You can't cope with why I can't cook or drive. The loneliest place I have ever been. The longest goodbye, the I'm not going to miss you effect. And you just don't see me anymore. Can you see me? I am here. Dementia equals clarity. It's okay here, scary but joyful, shocking but acceptable. I have made friends with my dementia, can live well but must do the work. Compassion, understanding, respect, peacefulness, inner strength. Can you see me? I am here, still alive, still able to contribute. Why does one simple word change the dynamics of a life lived? And without purpose, we are all treading water. Finding hope, purpose, and happiness is possible, yet it almost seems so far, almost out of reach. It's like dreaming, and in the morning you wake to reality, shattered. It's like waiting for the thunderstorm to pass. Hope was always there, but obliterated by heavy fog, challenging, frustrating. Without purpose, we are all treading water. Purpose is staying engaged and contributing in this community of people just like me, engaged with others with lived experience. My purpose is making his life as easy and simple as it can be, living in the moment, little moments of remembrance, remembering the amazing times we had together. Family, friends, a community of people just like myself, regardless of culture, country, race, or religion, who love me for me and what I bring to the table. Happiness in their happiness, courage in their courage. Happiness in the smiles when we are having a good day, satisfying when I have a good day, humor. Participating in the arts has given me permission to be happy once again. Poems, articles, or just a reassuring word. I find hope. I find purpose. I find.
Thank you, Martha. It seems like the end of that poem can benefit from some silence there. Thank you very much for that. One of the unexpected outcomes from the overall research study is also the development of Rare Dementia Support Canada. I'm interested, Mary Pat, if you can tell us a little bit more about Rare Dementia Support Canada and about how poetry will continue to feature in that ongoing work.
I apologize. The one train that comes into North Bay each day is coming in. So if you hear a train in the background, that's what it is. Yes, during the course of the study, we were fortunate to be approached by the Hillary and Galen Weston Foundation to offer a generous donation to establish what we're calling Rare Dementia Support Canada. And this will be the first of its kind here in Canada, setting up a support service for people with rare young onset dementia. And why one of the reasons why this is important are that people have been telling us throughout the course of this study is the absence of information and resources and supports that are tailored to their particular diagnosis. And so people are wanting to connect with people who have the same diagnosis. So people living with PCA connecting with other people living with PCA and so forth. And so this will be a support service that will primarily be virtual because of the numbers of people living with rare and young onset dementia are fewer than people living with Alzheimer's disease. We'll be able to connect people online to do individual, family, and a group support, as well as the development of resources that are specific to some of the different conditions for individuals living or caring for someone or supporting someone, including professionals who are often reaching out for specific information on some of the different conditions or diseases as well. And we will continue to deliver this service in partnership with Rare Dementia Support in the UK, which has been running for a number of years now. And so we will continue to work with them. So it's a cross-national adventure that we're embarking upon. And so we're very excited and pleased about that. But given our experience with poetry and what we're learning in terms of including the arts in dementia care support, we will be using some of our existing poems as well as engaging people in the continuing the contribution to the new development, the development of new poems as part of that process, the part of the process to find meaning, part of the process to increase their understanding, part of the process in sharing, and part of that process in terms of connecting with one another. So we will begin by using it and as well developing further understandings about how it contributes and benefits in terms of the delivery of support.
Thank you. We're coming close to the end of the hour, and we promised Nick that we would leave some time for a bit of discussion from the group and question and answer. I did want to just share a couple of things about the book publication, and then also to say some thank yous before we go into that the Q&A period. We've mentioned the publication of the book a few times tonight. There's so much more I could say will be available for purchase from the National Brain Appeal in the UK. We just found out today that that will very soon, perhaps even tomorrow, be up on the National Brain Appeal website. And the funds from the purchase of that book will go to support Rare Dementia Support in the UK and Canada. So Mary Pat was discussing the support services, the international support services that are starting here in Canada. For those of you that were interested in those words from Harry McQueen, I just wanted to conclude before the thank yous with a little bit more from his foreword about the book. He says that within these pages are pure evocative expressions of experiences that will hopefully inform and comfort those who read them. Poems that will act as friendly, loving embraces from one human to another. So we're hoping that the quilt of this book, the collective voices, the joining together of people that more often than not are having experiences on their own or feeling isolated, these words will come together, and that you might be interested in reading more. Before we go into questions and answers, I just wanted to say a very big and sincere thank yous from the Rare Dementia Support Impact Study to the Economic and Social Research Council in the UK, the National Institute for Health Research in the UK, the Hilary and Galen Weston Foundation for the funding of Rare Dementia Support Canada, the Rare Dementia Support Impact Study team at University College London and Bangor University, and also the National Brain Appeal in the UK. And then I have on the last of my list, but I think so very important, and highlighting a big thank you to all of the participants and the voices of lived experience that come through in this poetry, and all of the people that have come forward to participate in this research study and share their words with us and with you. So we've got a little bit of time. I promised Nick a little bit of time for questions. Shall I pass it over to you, Nick, for Q&A?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jen, Mary Pat, and Martha. Thank you so much for this really generous and intimate presentation. I learned so much, and I really feel like I'm coming away with something that I can't put a word to yet, and I appreciate that so much. There haven't been too many questions in the chat as we go. If anyone would like to share a question in the chat, we've got some thank yous here, which I know are always appreciated. Rose said, "Thank you, Martha. I heard some of my own words in your poem and am blessed." And but if you have any questions or anything, feel free to share them. I will sort of keep filling the silence a little bit to give you a moment to type. And if in the next minute or two we don't have any incoming questions, then we can just go ahead and wrap up the evening.
I just want to say one last thing, if I may.
Of course.
One of my points here, I feel very strongly that poetry is not well regarded in North America generally, and people are afraid of it. I think we're often teach it badly in school. We make people think that you have to crack it open and find the kernel. And so I hope that this kind of poetry will reach an audience in a different way and help make poetry part of daily life in a way that for most people it isn't.